Brian to put our TV on, our YouTube. Okay, so good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning and Appeals, I'd like to hereby call this meeting to order on this Thursday, October the 26th at approximately 7:30 p.m. We have a quorum of members, and at this time, I'd like to ask our Director of Community Development, Mr. Simmons, to please call the roll.
Williams? Here. Pippin? Here. Graziano?
Present.
O'Laughlin?
Here.
Kretschmer?
Here.
Jasper? Chairman Court.
Here. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to rise with us for the pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, everyone.
You sound really good, Brian. Sit down there hacking away.
Sorry. I'll let the cough drop down.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
So, Mr. Jaramillo, we just have a few administrative items to roll through here. But before we begin, I really do want to formally say welcome to the ZPA. I'm glad to know that you're on the mend. I think you'll find this group a collegial bunch of gentlemen that are very easy to work with, and we'll look forward to working with you as well.
Thank you. Appreciate the welcome.
You're talking about us, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm
Most of the time.
Could have fooled me. Gentlemen.
So, gentlemen, I think there was a little bit of back and forth on some of the package and whether or not you actually received it, but I see that some of you have notes in front of you. I just want to confirm that either electronically or in the packet you received at home, that you have the minutes from our last meeting of September the 14th.
Yes.
Is that correct for everyone?
Yep.
Because I know that I found myself without, and then I had them. So you might recall from our last meeting that we've now gone into a different practice of individually notating our individual cases. So we had 4 cases at our last meeting. And I want to see if anyone has any questions or comments about the meeting minutes from September the 14th, any of the 4 cases. That might be historical. Okay, so hearing no comments, the chair will seek general consent to approve the meeting minutes for the 4 cases of September the 14th. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, gentlemen. The next administrative matter, we were talking earlier that the petitioner for our original first case, which is ZPA case 10001 for PI Telecom, has requested an extension to November the 9th, which is our next scheduled ZPA meeting. And if everyone's in agreement, I'd like to seek a motion to continue that case to November the 9th.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion?
May I ask who made the motion
O'Laughlin.
and second?
It was a tie.
Graziano.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can just do this on a voice vote. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. So our next matter of business is Mr. Jaramillo. He's going to take us through, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. I know it's John. But,
That's fine. Yeah,
Yep.
you're great.
So Brian, I don't know if you'd like to kick this off in terms of where we are on the UDO and.
Yeah, sure. I'll try not to cough in the mic as much. As the board is aware, we've been working with Housley Levine and Associates over the past year on developing new development regulations for the Village of Cary, or at least revising our existing regulations. As the board will recall, last September we had a workshop before the ZPA where we had a couple of residents that came in and voiced comments on their concerns with the packet. We also had a couple of workshops that day with the public, commercial workshop and also residential workshop to garner some feedback on areas that the community sees issues or has recommendations for improving our code. Since that time period, staff has been working with members of John's team for giving them areas of the code that could use some improvement or refinement. And then over the course of this year, have started to draft those regulations. So this evening, we'll touch on a few areas of the code. It won't be the entire zoning ordinance, sign ordinance, or subdivision ordinance, but kind of start with our zoning districts and land use table to start off, really get into the weeds, if you will, on revising our ordinances. So this will be the first of a few workshops that we'll have in this regards to start to delve into the code. So with that, I'll be happy to turn it over to John for the discussion this evening, and then feel free to jump into the conversation or if you have thoughts or concerns to ask, and I'll be able to partake in that discussion as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons.
All
Over to you,
right.
Mr. Azil.
Nice to see you all again this evening. We're going to go through, as Brian said, we're going to start going through some proposed text amendments and changes to the code itself. Again, we're talking about a UDO, so it's a combination of the zoning ordinance, subdivision code, some design regulations, the sign code. It's a lot. And to give you sort of a visual reference, this is the UDO as everything assembled now, about how big it is. So it's about 1.5 inch paper, double-sided, like 10-point font. So it's a lot. And this isn't pretty pictures like planning with policy recommendations. This is the law that governs what you can do with your property. So it's a fairly diligent process to go through piece by piece. And as Brian said, we've broken it down into certain sections. We're going to begin going through it tonight. I'll go through certain sections with you. But again, over the upcoming next few months, we're going to be meeting again to go over different sections as we pull it together. So you didn't get red line versions or anything this evening. I want to sort of go over what we've done, why we're doing it, and discuss it with you. So as we begin to get feedback and formalize sections, I can begin to give those to you to see in advance of the meetings. But to give you an example of, here I can show you, like this is, and I will start with this, and I told Brian this, I think yesterday or today. We work with a lot of communities and with varying degrees of staff support on the municipal side in terms of their expertise or comfort level with some of what we provide as the hired experts. And Brian's knowledge of and understanding of zoning has really been helpful to us. And it really is a collaboration between our staff and yours. We don't often have that. So there really is an extensive back and forth on, we take a shot at crafting something, we give it to staff, Brian takes a look at it, he calls out, what about this, let's explore this, I would recommend that. We go back, then take his consideration and back and forth. So you're lucky to have him because it's made the process that much better, and it'll make your ordinance that much better.
We agree. Thank you for
I
that.
didn't pay him to say that.
No.
But if you see, like I said, the reason I didn't give you like a red line version is this is an example, one page. So this is a simple table and a little bit of text and about 80 comments on the side as to recommendations back and forth as to how to tweak it to make it better. So if I gave you this, your eyes would have glazed over starting about page 3. So there's no value in giving you this type of a draft of this. So what I want to do is go through, I'll go through this evening a presentation that will start the dialogue back and forth. So tonight, we're going to be going through the revised zoning districts, a draft map, and then we're beginning the discussion of what development standards are. That's the next piece. Districts are pretty straightforward. It's, you got your residential districts, your commercial, your industrial, your open space. It's specific to every property that is zoned something. Development standards are standards that apply to every district regardless of what the zoning is. What are the standards for parking? Doesn't matter what, what are your standards for landscaping or screening? So it's those standards of general applicability across the spectrum of all. So that's an extensive chapter, but we're going to begin to go through some of that this evening. But I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with our recommendations for districts. So tonight we're going to go through real quickly sort of an overview, sort of a recap of what we've done and why, where we are in the process, a review of the zoning districts and the standards for those districts. And by standards for the districts, I'm talking primarily about the bulk standards, and that's the use standards and the bulk standards. Bulk is height, setback, floor, lot coverage, things like that, the physical parameters. We're going to review the draft zoning map, and Brian and I can talk about some of the changes we've made and are proposing. And we're going to initiate the development standards discussion. Those, again, parking, landscaping, things like that. And then we'll get any feedback that you might have along the way. So it's just sort of an overview recap, sort of a 6-step process. What you see last time we met, number 2 was highlighted. That's when we presented you sort of an analytical best practices and a sort of a diagnostic of your existing code and what we saw as the biggest problems and things we need to address. Right now, we're concurrently working on steps 3, 4, and 5. That's the district standards and concepts. We'll go over all of that this evening. Subdivision regulations, general development and administrative standards. General development are those things I talked about, like landscaping, parking, design standards. Subdivision regulations, again, this is a UDO, it's not just zoning. Subdivision regulations are someone purchases a piece of property, cul-de-sac radius, street cross-section requirements, things, if you're going to subdivide property or develop it, these are your subdivision regulations, different from zoning, but in this case, it'll be folded into the UDO. The last thing we will begin to address is administrative standards, the procedures, the roles and responsibilities, sort of legally how it works, what the procedures are, and what the processes are to accommodate zoning relief, administrative relief. That'll be the last piece we do. So these are the three sections that are working on right now. What we're going to be going through tonight are what's in red, the district standards and concepts, and we're going to start talking about general development standards. So those are the two pieces we're going to go through this evening. Real quick, the goals of this is to merge zoning, subdivision, sign, stormwater into one document, the Unified Development Ordinance, a UDO. Our objective is to align it with the comprehensive plan and to simplify and organize it. Right now, it is one of the most beastie ordinances we've worked with in terms of just the length of it. That's a challenge to navigate. There's a lot of, as Brian can attest, there's a lot of redundancy between chapters. Something might be in 3 or 4 different places, slightly different in 3 or 4 different places. So we're trying to clean it all up to make it more user-friendly. Some of the key things that the comprehensive plan recommended was enhancing the community's image, creating more mixed uses, but a small town feel, having a more vibrant downtown and more sustainable development, and that's going to come through in the subdivision ordinance. But these are some of the key hallmarks of the plan. Comprehensive plan talked about promoting an intensity of uses in the TOD area by the downtown, supporting multimodal or multi-family housing near the downtown, and establishing more multi-person or shared parking. Strategy is to utilize design standards to promote high quality, strengthen the historic character, and to create a PUD that's better than the one you have now. The PUD now accommodates things at 40 acres or larger. You're not seeing a lot of that. You're seeing infill type stuff. Your PUD does not accommodate that. So we'll be restructuring your PUD ordinance as well. We want to align the comprehensive plan, which is that map you see there, with the zoning map. Here's an example. If you see, and I know laser pointers don't work on screens, they sort of disappear, which is too bad. But you'll see the area on the left outlined in black. That's the plan. You'll see the same area outlined in black on the right. That's the zoning. They don't really line up. So this is a chance to begin to reconcile the differences between the land use plan and the zoning map. You're not going to get 100% concurrency across the board, but you want to begin to align them as best you possibly can, being respectable uses that are on the ground. So some of the problems that we noted when Brian talked about, we met with business owners, we talked with residents, local builders. Some of the things that we've noticed that we're trying to clean up, your use tables and your other tables are excessively huge. I'll get into this a bit later to draw some attention to some of those problems. We're trying to reference to tables and permitted uses are unclear. Design standards are unclear for screening. Subdivision standards are located in the wrong place. And there's just unclear procedures as to the ZBA's role now that it's replaced by the Plan Commission and things like that. So we got to clean all that up. So the UDO table of contents, this is the table of contents we're recommending. It's already changed once in our office. It'll likely change a couple more times. But right now, you don't really know where to go in the code to find what it is you're looking for. It's difficult to reference, and more than anything else, your UDO has to be referenceable. It has to be easily referenceable so I know where to go to look. So we're proposing this: title, intent, and purpose, zoning districts, development standards, subdivision regulations, design standards for subdivisions, non-conforming buildings and uses, plan unit development ordinance, administrative procedures and enforcement, definitions, and sign code last. Right now, these are sort of all cobbled in different places. But this is likely will be the chapters and breakdown for your new UDO. So now I want to jump into zoning districts. So just a couple of things to touch on. And at any point, ask questions. It's a pretty a casual presentation. And again, I don't want to give you all the heavy text, but I'm trying to pull out changes.
So, John, I do have a question for you. The book that you're referring to, I assume each member would potentially get a copy of that, but do you also envision it would be online and searchable?
Oh, 100%, you bet. You'll all get, there'll be a hard copy, obviously, for all of you. A hard copy will be here. It'll be prepared online as a PDF, and it will likely have links in the PDF so you can click on a section and go to that. Because lots of times in zoning, which is why sometimes it's difficult to review zoning incrementally by chapter, because one chapter is reliant on the standards in another.
Precisely.
So if it says, you can have a cell tower subject to the standards established in section 15.7.5, if you clicked on 15.7.5, it would take you to that standard. So we want to make it as referenceable as possible.
Thank you very much.
And
Big step.
this section right now, just so you know, so this, as we've got a tab, this is signs, building and construction, subdivision, zoning, and outdoor dining. And this is 340 pages, double-sided. So it's a behemoth to try to get through. So we're trying to make it more user-friendly. So one of the key things that we've done is currently you have 17 zoning districts. We're proposing to go to 12. So right off the bat, it'll be a lot easier, and we'll go over a little bit more as to how we've collapsed those. But we have eliminated R1A, single-family residential, B4, neighborhood convenience business, BP, business park, and 4 PO districts, PO 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is the 4 park and open space districts. What we've created is 2 new districts, an R2A, single-family residence, and a single PO parks and open space district. And then we're also making some significant modifications to the B2, B3, and M districts. Yeah.
If we're eliminating R1A, how can we have an R2A if we don't have an R1A?
Because we have an R1, an R2, and an R2A. And I'll go over that in a little bit.
Okay.
So what we've done is we've eliminated 7 different districts, but we've created 2 more new ones that we had to just sort of fill the gaps and redistribute things. So there isn't going to be, for a given existence, we're eliminating BP because there was so much similarity in BP to aspects of M and some of the other business districts. So the ones could fit very easily in the other ones, so we could wipe out the BP district. So we're not creating a bunch of nonconformities, but we're making it slide into sections of the code that are a bit easier. This is a visual representation of what I'm talking about. So you can sort of track this. So the existing districts are on the left, and you can see all 17 of them there. What you see on the right is what we are proposing, okay? So you can see right now where you've got R1A will be sliding into a lot of the existing R1, the R2 will be sliding into the R2 and some in the R2A, and then the BP that is existing, some of those BP uses will go into B2, some of those existing BP uses will slide down to M because of the way the uses are. So we're not going to make these areas not conforming. We're not just going to wipe them and have them not have zoning. But this is the redistribution of the 17 districts you have now into the 12 we're proposing, okay? So that alone should make it much easier.
How does this compare to other work that you've done, John, in other communities? Is this 12 districts pretty much across the board, or?
No, it's different. It's totally different in every community. You'd think that zoning would have been vetted so much by now, there'd be like a silver bullet that would work everywhere. It's never the case. We, as a point of order, when we come into a community, the first thing we do is we look at the possibility of collapsing districts. What happens is zoning is sort of, unfortunately, reactionary as cases come up over time, and new districts get created to accommodate uses, as opposed to maybe making a use a conditional use or saying it's permitted provided you meet these standards. But what a lot of communities will do over time is they'll say like, well, if you want to have a restaurant district called RD, but you want outdoor dining, we're going to create one called the RDO. As opposed to just saying it's a restaurant district, you need a special permit for the outdoor dining use. So over time, we did an ordinance in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and I can still remember this. I think there were 27 different districts. So we went in there. I can remember going in front of the plan commission, and I said, like this, and this is the beginning. And I said, we're going to take a hard look at the number of districts you had, because we really think the number of districts that you have is inefficient and unnecessary. We don't think it's the right mix of the number. And one plan commission member said, he literally leaned in and said, see, he goes, I'm so glad to hear that, because I've been telling these guys there's at least 4 or 5 new districts I know we need to be adding to really service our city. And I said, well, I was thinking to go in the exact opposite direction. I think we got that down from like 26 to 18 or something like that. You don't want to unnecessarily reduce for the sake of reducing, but it's what you'll often find is like in business and industrial districts, they're often ill-defined. And so to mask being ill-defined, they create too many of them.
I'm looking at the context of being competitive.
Oh, yeah, oh, for sure. And again, what you'll often see is 4 to 6 residential, that's typical, somewhere in that range. And that can go from a state residential, if it's applicable, to several levels of single family and multifamily. You'll often see 2 or 3 commercial. You'll often see anywhere from 2 to 5 in the business park, business, light industrial, heavy industrial range of some kind. A lot of communities don't have any open space zoning. You do, most don't have any. It falls under what they call like an ORI, like an Office Research Institute is another industrial one. Or you'll see PRI, Parks, Recreational, and Institutional. So it'll be for parks and recs, schools, churches, that might, or universities, that might have a zoning. But you often don't see a flat out only open space. It's often in sort of an institutional one as well. So it's got to work for each community, and it's always a little bit different. But the strategy we're employing here is more typical now. And if you do a better job with conditional uses and procedures and standards, you don't have as many districts. So, and if you remember back, we did detailed GIS analysis. GIS is Geographic Information Systems. And we looked at a lot of in all your different districts and looked at what was required by code and what was actually existing out there. So this is your R2 minimum lot area of 10,890 square feet. This is required. Everything in purple is less than that. So even though your code requires 10,890, 60% or 80% of your lots don't meet that. So right away you have a problem. You've got a mismatch with what's on the ground and what's required. So we did zoning analysis and said, okay, if we ran GIS and said, let's knock it down to 10,000 square feet, would that help? Well, not much, all right? Let's knock it down to 9,500, a little bit better. 9,000, a little bit better. 8,500 was kind of a sweet spot. Most of it went away except in like these delineated specific areas. So if we can create these little areas, change the standard, then right off the bat, you've eliminated a ton of nonconformities. And that helps. If you go to refinance, let's say, you don't want any flags popping up in your refinancing. And while there's non-conforming lots everywhere in every city, it's easier for your homeowner just not to be burdened with the fact that I'm legal, but I'm non-conforming. Right. So by changing the area standard for this one district, you wipe out and eliminate 80% of the nonconformities. You can create a new district around the little areas where it's still nonconforming to create a new district. And we also went through and said, if we change it to this from the 10,890, are we creating a whole bunch of scenarios where people can subdivide? And the answer is no. So we're able to adjust the square footage requirement, get rid of all the nonconformities, and we haven't created these re-subdivision opportunities to change the character of neighborhoods. So it's a type of analysis we can now do, but historically had not been done. Most cities don't do that. So this is part of the rationale for why we're doing an R2A, and we're changing some of those numbers. So this is the draft zoning map that we've pulled together now, and Brian and I were working on this as recently as today to go over some stuff. And one of the things that you will see on here is you won't see BP, all right? You won't see that business park designation. But there are a few areas, and I can sort of come up here and point them real quick. You see these areas that used to be BP here?
Yeah.
Used to be
Stages.
BP over here, used to be BP over there. There's not a lot of it, just a few. So you had this district that only accommodated a few properties. But those uses that were in those properties could easily slide into a couple of the other districts. So we got rid of that district, wiped it away, and then moved those either into an M or a commercial district and cleaned all that up. We'll double check this. I had a couple of questions I'm going to go over with Brian with a couple other ones. We've got everything all cleaned up because there were a couple of zoning cases that we had to accommodate in the new map. The other thing I noticed just late this afternoon was your city's GIS map is different from the parcel lines on your city's GIS zoning map. Your base information is a little bit different, so we'll have to clean that up. And for example,
Different base layers.
yeah, there is I'm just going off of memory here, there's a right-of-way that goes here and connects that little cul-de-sac piece here, that's not showing up on your zoning map GIS, but it does on the city's GIS. And then there's a curved road that goes up through here, up to this road. And then your city's GIS is there, but for some reason on your zoning map,
It's not showing up, yeah.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take your city's GIS base map and recreate a whole new zoning map rather than trying to just change your existing zoning to make sure it's there's been subdivisions and development that has taken place that isn't reflected. So we're going to try to clean all that up and give you a fresh map. So this is an example of how clean the zoning is going to look, as opposed to being as scattered as the other one is. And if you hold this up and compare it to like the land use plan and the comprehensive plan, you'll begin to see a lot more consistency from regulation to planning. And that's what we want to begin to do. So that was part of the trick. So the other thing I want to point out, and it's tough to see on the screen, but hopefully you can see it on your screens. I didn't want to give you a red line version, but what I did do was highlight in red all the text that we've changed, or development standards. So these are your bulk standards or dimensional standards. This is height, setback, lot coverage, things like that. So you can see going across in red all of the different things that are different. I'm just going to walk up so I can see, and this way you can still hear me if you're recording. But you can see going across, I'll talk about a couple of things. The A1 zoning district, we changed it to 25 acres. It was 40 acres. Didn't seem to be appropriate to us, so we changed the square footage and the acreage for A1. If you look at E1, it's pretty consistent all the way across. R1, we changed the maximum lot coverage to 25%. So we decreased it a little bit. For really, really, really large lots, you don't want them to cover a third or half of the land. It never happens anyway. So we looked at some of your existing development in that area and readjusted that. If you look at the R2, we adjusted, again, the minimum lot area based on that GIS analysis of nonconformity. So that eliminates a bunch of the nonconformities, but it doesn't create redevelopment opportunity. Then we accordingly adjusted the lot width. It was 70, we moved it to 60, and we adjusted the exterior side yard setback. It was 30, we moved it to 20. For R2A, the new district, 6250 is that for those smaller lots still not conforming, and there's still little purple areas, those two little specific areas. So that was much more in line with 6250 just for those little areas. And then we also then adjusted both the lot width and the setbacks to coincide with the slightly smaller lot. Again, we're not creating the opportunity to create compact or super dense neighborhoods. It's reflective of what you have already built on the ground. If you look then going down a little bit further, the only other change going down here is the PO district, and we changed some of the height requirements there. So we created a few new districts. We adjusted the district standards accordingly, but most of the feedback we got from people wasn't that the height, setback, or lot coverage was a problem. There's a few things that we noted in working with staff, and we've made those adjustments.
Yeah, the lot coverage modifications, the R2 district, that regulation is also changed, it's not changed, highlighted in red.
Right.
It was 35%, but we changed that to 45. That's consistent with variations that we have supported as the maximum has gone up to that level.
Hey, John, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds,
No.
but in your dimension standards here, you got A through D. Is that something that we should just be generally aware of tonight, or is that just kind of getting in the weeds? Because some of these categories have letters next to the numbers,
For which one?
any of them.
Oh, no, that's coming up next. Hold on.
Okay.
It's like you teed me up, all right? So if you look at some of these numbers, you will see little footnotes in parentheses or A, B, C, D, whatever. Some of these are contingents upon, maybe if depending on the use, you could build something a little bit taller. Or maybe depending on the use, you could have a little slightly different setback or lot coverage, but it's only specific to conditions. So wherever you see dimensional requirements with a letter in the ordinance, and I'll show you this real quickly to look at. In the ordinance, what you see on the screen right now is the table right here, okay? But the table actually has two parts. The bigger part is what's below the table, okay? And that is, it's like we planned this. That is that, okay? That is A through K. So if you look at the numbers, you'll see little like footnotes. And it's if you look at a dimensional standard that says, okay, footnote A, you'll see like if the lot is adjacent to a residential district, then the same residential district, then the residential district requirement if it is more restrictive. So you have the setbacks to follow, but if there's a little B in there, you can say like, I can follow these except if I'm next to residential, then I have to adhere to the residential district standards. We talk about lot coverage, but then we go to H. Porous paving materials are exempt from the lot coverage requirements in the Parks and Open Space District. So if you look at the PO district and you see that under lot coverage, it'll give you a number, but if the park district is using permeable pavement, it doesn't count. So wherever there is an exception to the table, and the one thing you have to remember with zoning, you design regulations not for the exception. You design regulations for the 95% scenario. knowing that the other 5% may need to seek relief. You just can't write a code to accommodate every scenario. That's why you have conditional uses, that's why you have PUDs, and it's why you have variations, to accommodate the guy that doesn't fit the 95%. It's impossible to write a code that doesn't. So whenever there is an exception that we anticipate, this should cover all of them. So you look at the dimensional standards, they have to abide by those unless they are referred to this table, which is right below the or the division table. So in the ordinance, it'll appear on one page as one table. So you see a letter, you immediately look right below and see what the condition is, all right? But, so we've made a few changes to these. We've cleaned up the wording for if you're adjacent to a residential district. It was listed in 2 or 3 places, slightly different each time, and it was kind of repetitious and ambiguous. So we cleaned it up and just created one footnote B. We talked about I, creating and adding permeable brick paver systems and porous paving material. Technology has changed, as has construction methodology from last time. So we used some of the terminology the construction industry uses now for permeable pavers and changed that. And then last one, K, is lot coverage of up to 75% allowed for permitted uses, conditional and non-residential. So in the residential district, you might not have a single family home, you may have a school. And if you do, you can have a bigger lot coverage than a single family home would, because you're in non-residential use in a residential district. So all of these relate to exactly what you said. They go back to the numbers on the table.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to highlight in red, and we'll go back, Brian, and catch that 35 to 45% you talked about. But I'm trying to show you without giving a red line what we've changed in red by just highlighting it in red. The next page in the ordinance talks about use regulations. And this tees up the use table, okay? In the use table, you have things that are either permitted uses, conditional uses, uses that are not permitted at all. Some uses might not appear on the list, or uses that can be done, on more than one lot. And then what we eliminated, so we left these the same, that was worded very clear, it was very easy to understand. We eliminated this thing called intensive use, all right? You had a thing on there that said if something is classified or deemed to be an intensive use, it could be required to have a conditional use, blah, blah, blah. And intensive use was anything that could generate up to 1,500 visits or trips a day, okay? I've never seen that in an ordinance before. A busy McDonald's might have that. So with all the other regulations you have in your ordinance, there really was no need on your table, your use table, to identify something that would be considered or deemed to be, without definition, an intensive use. So we took it off. It was ambiguous at best. So the other standards, A through E, remain. They're still there. This is what you see before you get to the use table, because the use table will have permitted, conditional, or not permitted. So this defines what those are. Now we get into the table itself. And this is the last section of the district standard. So you can see it. When people think of zoning, all they think about is, I'm zoned R8, and I can build to 35 feet tall, and my setbacks are this. And these are the uses I can have. To most people, that's zoning. And that's 20% of the code at most. So, but it's one of the first things you have to get iced down. So that's why we're going through it this evening. If you see here again as well, and I'm not going to go through this because as you can see, it's very long. Now, as long as this is your existing use table in your existing code right now, let me see if I can get this straight because I want to make sure I got it right. It's over 300 individual uses identified. All right, that's a lot. And it's an approach that communities don't do anymore. Because you try to think of every possible use. I think when I met you before, I joked about we still see uses for telegraph repair facilities. Well, no one's using telegraphs anymore, let alone having a store that does nothing but repair them. But you'll see stuff like this in codes all over, as opposed to saying small service business or general retail, but you'll see some codes that say ladies hat shop, man's hat shop, sock store, tie store, casual attire, formal attire. I mean, you'll see when they could just say general retail. Right. All right. So your existing table has over 300 uses. We've gotten it down to 149, and we've broken it down by category. So what you'll see is, and what we did here just to show you, is we didn't split any per screen. So you'll see, I'll go through to here. So you'll see residential uses. You'll break it down to vocational schools. Another category is recreational uses. Another one is hospitals. Another use is laundries, general retail. You'll see it. So you'll see uses by category. So we don't, it's not in a laundry, you can just go right to like commercial uses. You can go straight to industrial uses. You can go straight to service or office uses. You can go by the category of use. It's very quick to find it. And if somebody comes up with something in the future that doesn't fit well into one of our interpretations, then staff could say, we deem this to be most analogous to this, it would go here. But you don't have to keep amending your table all the time, and you're not trying to create a laundry list that's extensive. So for each one of these, what we'll see, and I won't go through each one, but if it has a white box, that means it's not permitted. Okay? If you see an X, that means it's permitted as of right. If you see a C, it's a conditional use. Means you have to go through public hearing and get approval to do it. And the best way to do that, as example, is like a drive-through. A drive-through may be appropriate and may not be appropriate. It depends on, is the site big enough? Does it have good access? Do they have enough queuing space for the cars without it going out into the street? Is it next to a single-family home? The speaker system for the ordering is going to keep people awake. So it may be appropriate, it may not. The applicant has to come in and make their case. If they convince you that it's correct, you will grant them a conditional use. So the uses here are either not permitted, blank, permitted with an X, or conditional with a C. Now, what we've done, because we've changed the districts, so you can see at the top, the white letters are the districts you currently have, but we have an R2A and we have the new PO. So at the top, you'll see those two districts in red. So, but we've changed, and when we got rid of the BP, we had to move those BP uses into other districts, all right? So you'll see things in here where it's red, we've changed the classification. We've either added it or changed it. And one of the things that we tried to do was to move more things into the appropriate district as of right. So we're trying to cut down on the amount of public hearings people have to go to for uses that typically get approved anyway. And if we can tighten up the standards, you don't have to review everything because the standards will be better. They have to adhere to a higher quality standard development. As of right, they have to. Whereas before, your code didn't require higher quality, so you wanted people to come in to make sure you were getting it. But if we can tighten up the code, they should be able to do it as of right if they meet the code. So we're trying to make it, again, easier for you, easier for Brian to administer, and easier for businesses to come in without having public hearings, yeah.
Just a question to pick your brain. A lot of you, of the homes that are doing the Airbnb and stuff like that, how has that been addressed at other municipalities, and
That's a good question.
has it? I don't know.
And it's one of the things, in the copy that I drilled down, it's, as Brian or staff would make a note on something, we would go through and say, yeah, here's our conclusion on that, and we'd change it, we'd eliminate the note because we addressed it. But that's when we still left in there. Again, there is no singular way to do it. Some people are just silent on it. Don't want it, don't ask, don't tell. You know, it is what it is. And others try very diligently to regulate it. The tough thing about regulating stuff is, can you enforce it?
Yeah.
Or do you even know? So the jury's still out on how we want to address that here. We don't know yet.
Okay.
It's been, we haven't addressed it yet. Brian even raised it in his notes, hey, we got to sort of take a look at this. In certain districts, you don't want to allow it at all. We do have it identified, though, just so you know.
That's good.
Pardon?
That's good.
Let me find out, because we do have it in here.
It's a tourist home, I think is how it is now.
Pardon?
The tourist home in the residential section.
Right.
We have had a couple of properties in the village that have been operating them. that
Right.
are Not allowed. In the single-family residential district, I think how it's classified, there's vacation home. Yeah, tourist home is,
We have it listed, yeah, right here is tourist home.
Oh, okay.
that's in our code currently, and
Right.
that's the definition that we currently have exist. But as part of this process, as John alluded to, it's something that
Right.
I want to look at closer because it is more of an issue that's starting to occur in the area.
So right now, it's listed as a conditional use in three of your districts. It's listed as a conditional use. But we're looking into that right now. We're not, some of these may change over time as we do more work or have more feedback or whatever. This is our first shot working back and forth with staff, and this is probably 95% good, but there's a few we still have notes to address. And what is called a tourist home is Airbnb.
Okay.
And we're taking a look at if the existing code does well enough, or if it's becoming to be more of an issue, we want to find a different way to address it.
Yeah, and
So it's on the list, but we may go back and revise how it's allocated.
Okay.
And how that regulation is now, I mean, if you're looking at the R3 district, that's any townhouse and community apartment buildings. It's not currently allowed in any of our single-family districts.
Right.
So it'd be downtown or kind of one of our multifamily developments. And it's more than looking at that regulation, does it make sense to modify it or,
Right.
going forward for.
Yeah, that's how I read it. Okay.
And then the other question is, like anything else, is it's not allowed in your single-family district now. It's a conditional use in your multifamily or townhome districts. If someone did it in their single-family home, how would you know?
Right.
Well, your neighbor would know.
Yeah, right, they might. So again, so we're taking a look at it, we're not exactly sure. It's one of those things that was never contemplated back when
Sure.
ordinances were written
Yeah.
because the issue didn't exist, but we're beginning to try to look at it. So you're spot on. So, but that's one of our notes right here. In fact, I can even see Brian's note was Airbnb's question marks have this use, this to state that it's not allowed without conditional use or text amendment. So right now it would require a conditional use, or someone would have to come in and petition a text amendment, which wouldn't be conditional to a property or an application, but it would be then a text amendment to all similarly zoned properties. So it would be generally applicable. So we have to see if the way the code's handling it now is what we want going forward. We're not sure yet.
I noticed on your previous screen, you happened to land on communication towers or antennas, whatever it was called,
Okay?
and it was only allowed in the M district.
That's another one we're looking at right now, and the note is, there's a difference between a standalone tower versus the facilities now, which are usually about 6 inches wide, 3 feet tall, and they're adhered to existing structures. So there's a couple of different ways to approach it. Should it be in the M district or any public building or public property like a water tower or a village hall or something like that? Or do we want to allow them in some other way if it's the smaller antennas arrays that go on existing structures? So that's another note. It's funny, you guys are like, it's like you're looking over Brian's shoulders. That's another note that Brian flagged in our first draft, is we want to take a closer look at this. We will likely require a couple of different standards depending on the type of development and or facility being proposed. So one is a standalone tower, which you don't want in a residential. That should probably be secluded in a few ways. But most providers, and then co-location may be a requirement. But the other thing that we're seeing more and more is the smaller antenna arrays, where they look for the tallest building in town and say, can we go there? And it's usually a public works or whatever, and municipalities are reaping the benefits of that. So we're looking at that right now.
You know, the only reason I brought it up is the case that was
Before here, right?
before
Yeah.
was for a higher than 35-foot tower in a B2 district.
Right,
Correct.
right.
So
Currently, our code allows it in all of our business districts and the manufacturing district.
Right.
So this part of the revision is looking at, is that appropriate for, what the community wants, but looking at, if there are other ways, as John alluded to, it could be mounted on structures so that, co-location on a water tower, ComEd power lines, ball field lights at the park district or the high school, or possibly camouflage in the church steeple, those types of installations could be looked at,
Right.
so that the code can still address that, but.
flagpoles at a public works.
Or something,
right, right.
right? I mean,
Yeah, Priscilla. There's multiple ways to skin the cat on that one, but.
when I was the director deputy director in Wilmette, I worked with the then attorney, Tim Frenzer, who's now the manager. But we worked, and that was back when the federal telecommunication ordinance sort of first came out. So we crafted a telecommunication ordinance for Wilmette that served sort of as a model nationally for a long time. But that was back when municipalities still started realizing the revenue stream and requiring it that it be on municipal property. But yeah, so like mines are, I'm telling you, this is one of Brian's notes. Allow for taller cell towers to be installed in the M districts, ? Small cell sites or co-location on existing infrastructure, water tower, athletic lights, poles, et cetera, to be allowed in other districts, ? So it's another one that we took a shot at, sort of like maybe we want to use this as a starting point, and Brian said, let's take a harder look at this. So you guys picked up on the Airbnb comment, you picked up on the cell tower, so you guys are right on track. So we're looking at that. And the challenge of this is, it is it's a rapidly changing technology, and what used to be the standard 15 years ago is not anymore. And even though Federal Telecommunications Act requires cities accommodate them, it doesn't say how. It just says you can't deny them. Because back when they first started out, cities were denying them. And the federal government had to come out and say, listen, like roads, this is necessary infrastructure. So you have to accommodate it somehow, but you can be as restrictive as you want. So we're still taking a look at that. So this is the use table. Again, shortly we'll be getting you guys for the next round. You'll be getting, once we've had a discussion of this, we'll work a little bit more with Brian to refine a couple of the outstanding ones. And then this will be a district standards and a map we can give you. This is sort of a nice clean piece while we begin looking at all the other stuff that really cross references. But this is one that will shore up a couple things, and you gave you guys that copy. So even though we might meet next time to talk about something totally different like parking and landscaping, I can open up by saying, does anybody have any questions about the districts and map that we gave out hard copy to you guys a few weeks ago? So before we get into the new material, is there anything we want to clean up on the old material? So you'll get this because this section is now all done, minus a little bit of tweaking, all right? And when I say all done, I don't mean it's done. I mean, we've prepared a draft for your review and we're moving on to the next piece. So zoning won't get approved incrementally. It gets approved all at the end as a package. So, and when I say done, I mean for you guys to look at. So that is every aspect of the districts and the district standards, both in terms of the use table, the dimensional standards, the collapsing and or creation of new districts, and the maps we want to recommend for those districts. So in terms of most people, like realtors or homeowners or business owners, the first thing they look at in a code is that. What's my property zone? What can I do? And what rules am I bound to when I develop or build? And that is the section we just went over. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll get you that refined hard copy for you guys to look at your leisure while we move into other sections. All right. But that was the main thing I wanted to cover tonight, was that piece.
Thank you.
What I want to go through next, and I'll go through it pretty quickly, is I want to go through and begin to talk about the next section, which is, so again, we've cut this table down in more than half. So, and we may even cut it further. The next thing I want to talk about is development standards. Now, these are all the things that are in your development standards somewhere right now, okay? Basic requirements for all districts, access to public streets, accessory uses and structures, landscaping, number of buildings on a lot, off-street parking and loading, open space, outdoor storage, performance standards, and telecommunications. So as we begin flushing out the rest of the code, some of these pieces may get moved to another section, they might stay. But this is one where, like, you look at the use table, you sort of think about this in sequence. I look up and I say, okay, my zoning is, M. I can still look and I say, here's my dimensional requirements, height, setback, lot coverage. Here's the uses that are permitted. Oh, for outdoor storage, what are my development standards for outdoor storage? You can look on here to see. So anybody that's proposing a use needs to look at these headings to see if one of these applies to them. All right? So these are things that it doesn't matter if you're M or B or R. If you're putting in a parking lot for a church, parking lot for a rec building, or parking lot for a Whole Foods, what are the standards for parking? Right? It doesn't matter. Parking space is a parking space. What are those design specs? So these are development standards of general applicability that go across the spectrum of all zoning districts. So it's a pretty important section. So I'll go through these pretty quickly. We've begun to go through, and we have made initial assessments of basic requirements for all districts, access to public streets, landscaping, number of buildings on a lot, and off-street parking and loading. We haven't finished going through all these, but we've gone through it enough for me tonight to flag you what I think we need to address. So that the next time we meet, this is the section we're going to go through. I want to go through this next time and the sign ordinance. That's going to be a heady meeting. And then you'll get the other district stuff in advance, which is what we just went over. But I just want to go through real quickly in a few minutes. I don't know how we're doing fine. I want to go over in a few minutes and talk about where we are with all these. So the basic requirements for all districts, we've looked at this, and right now we don't have a lot of changes. We're going to go back and see if we want to clean up some of the language, but it talks about the intent of the development standards, non-residential development specifically in the B3R, because that's a unique district in terms of scale and uses being residential structures for business uses. The criteria for development standards, and then it talks about building material, and then it talks about sort of design, style, texture, materials, that's sort of generally speaking. And that's sort of that your entry threshold for quality. You just want to make sure you're setting that minimum bar expectation. So that's at the very beginning. It's a very brief section, but we think it tees it up pretty well. The next section is access to public streets, and this is broken down into two different divisions. It's broken down into driveways not accessing state highways and driveways that access state highways into two different divisions. And what the two things, and these standards here are fine. It talks about the driveway width and how long, the driveway comes in off the streets. It's all very standard, engineering driven. It works for vehicles. We're not making any changes. But one of the things that we're addressing here, and Brian brought this up, and it's a good point, in the comprehensive plan, we really talk about, can we promote internal cross-access of adjacent parking lots? So if you're at the Whole Foods and next door is a Petco, can you drive from one parking lot to the next without having to go onto the street, get into traffic, make a left, go down the street 200 feet, take another left in? You can eliminate curb cuts by providing joint driveways, and you can provide internal cross-access where it's applicable and where you can pull it off. So in the standards for driveway accessing or not accessing state highways, we've added two specific conditions. There are several already in there that are fine, but we've added these two. Internal side cross connections to adjacent property shall be installed at the direction of the community development director. Where we see this consistently, when you get your draft, you'll see there's reference a lot to the community development director being able to do things administratively based on their best judgment. If Brian makes a determination, the applicant says, I disagree with that, they would appeal it to this group, right? 99.9% of the time, they don't get appealed because it's sound decision-making in every community, if the direction is there. So at the direction of the community development director, if it is determined that such cross connection improves circulation and safety while providing sufficient ingress and egress to the site. He's not going to do it at the detriment to the operation of the site, but if it works for the site and it works for the surrounding area, then we should see if we can't pull it off. Previously, this area was silent. It only talked about access to the site from the public right-of-way. It didn't talk about access to the site from an adjacent site. So this is an important one. The other one is shared access or driveway. It may be that you don't have direct access. Maybe you share a shared access with an adjacent property. And this is happening more and more. It's less to maintain. So shared access driveways may be permitted and or required if determined by the community development director to be necessary and or advantageous in terms of overall circulation, ingress, egress, and safety of the subject property and surrounding areas. So again, we're not saying it has to be this way, but on a case-by-case basis, Brian ought to be able to say, hey, let's take a look and see if this doesn't work for you two, it would work better for us. The code was silent on it before, but it's something we want to begin to promote where appropriate. So
I'm in agreement with that. I just have a question for yourself, Brian, and maybe for yourself, John. 10 years from now, Brian's on to perhaps bigger things, and he's in another community, running a community. Is this a best practice from what you've seen? I think it's a great idea,
Yeah.
and I thoroughly agree with it. I'm just thinking that, is there a fail-safe in this process that we have someone that's not like Brian, and we've made this decision, and it's a different personality, and they're trying to jam it down someone's throat?
Boy, I've never run into that before. Usually what the question is, and I still would not be concerned about that. If you had a community development director that you felt as though, or the city felt as though, the village said, well, they're sort of jamming this stuff down, they're not working well with property owners, and maybe this isn't the best person to make these decisions. My guess is they won't be community development director for long. I don't know. The question we typically get is, what if you grow in size and Brian gets a staff and he says, hey, listen, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Sarah, you are rock solid at this. Sarah, you are my designee to make these determinations. You have now that authority. So when we have this in the code where it says community development director, we can actually put in the definition, we can say community development director and put a definition as, described by you, and say, and for purpose of administrative decision-making, add his or her designee. So it could be Brian or somebody he designates. And so I guess if at some time the village didn't feel as though the community development director could do that, they can say, for going forward, we determine the community development director or his designee, well, we're going to make the designee and it's going to be you. So we will identify it as the community development director, but it may be, he might say, hey, listen, the public works director might be able to make this call better. So for this issue, I designate them. But it would be his responsibility or that person's responsibility.
I get the premise. So I guess my question back to you, Brian, is that in your previous experience, did you folks have anything like this in your code, or is this I know it's a good step forward.
Yes, no, this is consistent with other communities I've worked for that have done similar practices like this. And as John mentioned too, if there is a developer or business owner that doesn't agree with whoever's in my position's
move it
decision,
forward.
they can always appeal that decision to this board, and this board can make that decision for them.
Right.
Thank you.
And that's one of the things in Illinois where this is a recommending body to the village board on most things, but in appeal, you're the ultimate, you're the authority. It doesn't even go to the village board. You hear the appeals. So,
I think this is a good development.
all right. I think what he's saying, Brian, is you can't take another job, is what I heard. So, just,
In my experience, you name someone, in my case, it was permit engineer. I had a staff of 5, 6
Right.
people. And I told them that you're out there in the field, you make the decision,
right,
I'm gonna back you up
Right.
unless it's really stupid.
right.
So ultimately, it's me making the decision, whereas it would be.
You're exactly right. You're exactly
So
right.
I
That's-
don't know that we even need, or does it?
Yeah, and again, some communities ask for it. I don't think it's necessary either. I would agree. Because if you're a department head or a director or something, you have people beneath you that are on board because they're capable, and sometimes they're better at the person running the department to make those types of decisions. And they might prepare the memo, they might make the determination, but if it's under my guard, it's my responsibility.
Right.
So I agree 100%. When I was the director, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
I did it with my inspectors, everything, yeah.
My signature that's going on the permit
exactly right.
recommendation,
Right.
so.
So this is standard practice, and I think that safeguards are in, but it'll begin to have less things come to you.
Yep.
And it'll begin to have less things needing variations in public hearings, which is what we're trying to get at.
Bingo.
All right. So this is the only change so far that we think we're going to make to the access to public streets. Next thing is landscaping. This is too busy to get into this evening. This is a heavy chapter. We've written a lot of landscape codes. Now, our first cut through this, we're beginning to sort of look at what we can tweak and shape and refine and whatever. But I may actually go back and talk to Brian, and I may actually propose taking the whole section out and replacing it with a whole one that I think is better. This one is tough. A lot of codes will create, some codes have point systems. Any site has to achieve 300 points. You get 2 points for an azalea, you get 15 points for a shade tree, and they create a point system saying a certain percentage of your points has to come from these types of plantings, okay? You guys don't do that, but you do create, so right now it covers tree-lined streets, tree specifications, size, type, substitutions, location, quality, retention of existing trees, and screening. And screening is the toughest one. So one, we've already removed the species table. Anytime you have something in the ordinance that can be removed, it should be, because if Brian and his department has, this is Carrie's official list of approved species for installation, all right? He can change it from time to time whenever he thinks it's necessary based on arborist reports or best practices. If it's in here and it changes, you have to have a text amendment, you have to have a public hearing, like, you don't need that.
Yep.
So what we've done is we've eliminated all those tables, which is, again, you guys win for tables, I'm telling you. That's a big chunk of what this volume is. So you have the table in here of all the species, when we can just say, has to be on the approved list of species, on file with the Community Development Department, comment as updated from time to time. Done, and then you keep the list and be done with it. So we've changed that, removed the tables, we've done that. Tree preservation plan, right now, this is another suggestion Brian had, is right now it says you have to try to, I think, retain 60% of the trees on site that are 12 inches in diameter or greater. You have to preserve 70% of trees on site that are 6 inches in diameter or greater. And if you can't meet those, and then there's some provisions in there for like hardship, but if you don't meet those, you're coming in and get a variation. And again, not knowing what some of the sites are, that could be tough. And so people are coming in for getting a variation to remove a couple percentage differences of trees. Now, I'm assuming you're going to approve it, but it's still a public hearing, it's time, it's money, it's whatever. So what we're doing is we're having a requirement for a tree preservation plan. And part of the tree preservation plan means needs to have a survey of all the trees on your property 6 inches or bigger. And then you have to submit a plan on what you're going to keep or try to keep, and Brian has to sign off on it. All right? And if he doesn't sign off on it, then they've got to come and get relief, okay? But my guess is Brian's going to work with them and say, like, listen, try to preserve X, Y, and Z. This is a good plan. This makes perfect sense with me. I'm signing off on it. Go. Whereas and this is why I have a problem with arbitrary percentages, is because what if they were able to preserve 68% of the trees 6 inches or greater, but not 70%? That could be a tree. They would have to come in and get a variation.
How do you even know?
Well, that's the other thing. Well, they were required to do a tree survey, but, so they have to do a tree survey, they have to go to Brian and say, here's our plan for going forward, Brian signs off on it, they go. So,
I've been on this board couple of years, I can't ever remember anybody coming in for a variance for the number of trees.
Well, good, they won't ever again. So, but it's just, it's one of those things that is just unnecessary, so we're wiping it out of the code.
Kids are kids with one.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that.
The other thing is screening. Now, screening is a bit more difficult, and your code really goes out of the way in a couple of different things that are different. It breaks, that use table with 149 things that I just showed you that used to be over 300 things. Well, your screening section in your landscaping section of your design and development standards breaks all those uses down into 5 classes based on intensity. And depending on what class is next to another class, it triggers what level A, B, or C screening you have to put into place. All right? Sort of like Yahtzee with plants. All right? This is I got a 3. It's tough. It's tough to follow. It's a lot of detail. It's not the point system I talked about, but it's a non-point equivalent, I guess I would say. I don't know if it's,
I'm
yeah.
here to tell you, that you put a row of trees 10 feet apart, I can see between them.
I agree. So even though it's an arduous process to understand, I don't know if the standards are necessarily good. And some of them are 20 feet or 30 feet on center. So we're going to take a hard look at this. And this entire landscape section, I don't know if it merits going in and tweaking it or replacing it. And we're still looking at that. But this is, if you remember back when I did this, on the left is an illustration of what is required. This is actually from your code. This isn't like, I didn't have like a 3rd grader draw this. This is actually an example of the screening that's required in your code per your formula. On the right, and I'm not saying the right is the equivalent of the left. On the right are actual examples of landscaping screening illustrations that we put in our zoning ordinances when we write them. So, and here's another one. So the one at the top, some of them, depending on if you're really next to like a class 1 use next to a class 4 use, you have to have 2 rows of trees. So it gets to your thing. You have to have 2 rows, not just a row of trees. You have to have 2 rows of trees, and they have to be staggered. So that's what that great illustration is at the top. Just so you know, that's a double row staggered shade trees. So, but we're looking at all of it because we're just not convinced that's what it needs to be. That's a heavy lift. We're getting into it. I've got an LA on board. He's looking at it as well. We've written several landscape codes. And again, like all of our codes, we try to have a much more streamlined, efficient method. And I think we could probably drop in one that we've done for another community and tweak it, and it would be easier to follow and make a lot more sense. So we want to be respectful of what you have, but
No, I think to be quite forthcoming, John, we are really looking for best practices.
Yeah, and that's
I
what-
think
yeah,
it was kind of
right.
a bolt-on approach to
Right.
the code, and I think that's exactly why we got to where we are today.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
and this is a good example of it's just a tough one to navigate. So I remember I was at a public hearing once, and I was talking about rewriting a zoning code, and I said, listen, I don't know, and it was in the Chicago region. I said, I'm convinced back in like 1978, some law firm put together one of the worst codes I've ever seen, and because it's the legalese and how complicated it is, and it got picked up and replicated by 80% of the suburban communities in Chicago. And I was saying this about a code, and I'm not joking, sitting off to the side at one of the councils. So there's an attorney with the
the guy that
community,
wrote it?
and that attorney was the village board's attorney. The same law firm provided a different attorney for the plan commission, and that attorney was over here, and she goes, I wrote that code. Like, I wrote this code. I felt so bad. Yes and no, but we still rewrote it, but, so it needs to be much better. Number of buildings on a zoning lot, again, I don't know that I've seen this before in design standards, but it's a real brief section, so there's no harm in having it. But it talks about residential districts, dimensional requirements, and building on multiple lots, not multiple buildings on a single lot, but this also talks about multiple buildings, or a single building on multiple lots, and it refers only to as authorized in the PO district. Because you may assemble several properties for a park, but not officially assemble those into one zoning lot. And you may have like some sort of a park facility structure that straddles 2 lots, and you have the ability to approve that. The one thing we're going to be adding here is when we develop our new PUD standards, we're going to be making sure that the PUD is another vehicle by which you can have multiple buildings on a single lot. Right now, the PUD is mentioned as a way of approving that, and that has to be. So we're going to, but this section is real straightforward. The next one is parking. This section covers a lot as parking needs to. So general requirements, spaces required, number of spaces, the location, shared parking, dimensional requirements, surfacing, driveway. It gets into maintenance. It gets into things a lot of codes don't. Reductions, which is good. You can reduce number of parking for protecting trees, bike racks, motorcycle paths. The challenge in this code is in most zoning ordinances, you say, this is the table of parking required. Retail, it's this, but usually you'll say retail, personal service, banking, whatever else. It'll list those only things, and it'll say 4 spaces per 1,000. For assembly, church, movie theater, whatever else, this many per square footage, whatever. And it's maybe a couple pages long, maybe. Sometimes it's 1 page. Yours is 18 pages long, all right? Again, it identifies parking standards for every use you could possibly think of with caveat, it's just not necessary. So we're going through that right now with best practices, and even some of the old standards are out and new ones are in. But to give you an example, some of your requirements are based on number of employees. And I'm going to go back to the enforcement thing. If someone's coming in to petition for a use and they don't quite have the property they need, and I've seen this a million times, whether you've seen it or not, you will, if we don't fix it. And they'll say like, listen, we only plan on having 6 employees on premises at any one time. That's the way our operation functions, 6 employees. So we got more than enough room. So with 6 employees, you're required to have 2 parking spaces for 3, so, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you go there after it opens, you're thinking like, well, this is a parking disaster. They got 23 people working in there. You can't have it based on employees. It's got to be based on square footage and or number of built seats or whatever. So we've got to really go through and clean up your parking because it's tough. 2 other things we might want to consider for your parking, we're going to be looking into this. You have detailed definitions and requirements for loading. It sounds funny, a lot of municipalities, the requirements for loading are just going away. And what I mean by, and the reason why is because a business won't, unlike parking, a business tends not to propose something if loading is essential for their use. They often will ensure that they have that loading space. Like a grocery store has to have a place for, you don't have to stipulate where that is. Whatever use is going in there, if they can't load their business up with what they need, they're not going to propose it. So a lot of ordinances now, loading requirements are disappearing. So we want to take a look at how we want to structure the loading requirements. And the other thing is minimums and maximums. Right now you have the minimum number of parking is X, all right? But a lot of communities are now beginning to have a maximum number of parking because it gets at stormwater runoff, which I know is an issue here. It gets at landscaping and the appearance of commercial properties. And I'll give you a case in point, only because I've seen this in a few different places, and I'm not singling out this business. I like them. I'm just saying as an example. I've come across this a few times. A CVS or any other type of a store will identify the location they want on a corner or whatever, because it works for them. They'll come in, they'll buy it, they build their 13,000 square foot store. If you're required to have like a 10-foot setback, they'll put in the 10-foot setback, they'll build their building, and they pave everything else for parking, all right? So a code will say you have to have a minimum of, let's say, 28 parking spaces based on calculation. But they would rather have asphalt to shovel than they would landscaping to install and or maintain. So they pave everything. What this does by saying you have a maximum, say, listen, you're required by code to have 28. You can go 15% over that. We'll let you put in another 5. But then everything else is landscape area. You can't just pave everything and put in 58 parking spaces if code only requires, no, we don't want that pavement. So we'll let you go a little over what's required, but it's a maximum parking. And we were doing work in Traverse City, which is, I don't know if you guys have ever been there, it's a beautiful city. And Russ Storing is the director there, and he's been there a long time. They've been doing this for a long, for like 14 or 16 years they've been doing this. The rest of the country is kind of catching up. But they had a CVS come in and propose that, and so they pushed back and said, oh, we can't. He went on Google Earth and looked at CVS's all over the country and sort of just counted cars, counted number of empty spaces, and he's like, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, you never had more than like 14 cars in any CVS anywhere to go. He did a ton. He said, so I wasn't going to listen to your case against a parking maximum. He goes, no, parking maximum's in effect. I'm not going to give you relief for that. So something we might want to take a look at, and you may not have abuses now, but if you're beginning to get at things like resiliency and hazard mitigation and stormwater events and whatever else, And aside from the science of stormwater management, just having more landscaping, more green space, more whatever, then let them have what they have to have, let them have a little bit more, but then start demanding that the rest not be paid. So it's another thing we want to look at in this section as we begin to craft it together right now, so. So again, we've begun to look at landscaping, we've begun to look at parking, we've looked at all your other standards, multiple buildings and everything else. We still have a lot, if you remember, in this section. These are the other things, accessory uses, open space, outdoor storage, performance, there's still a whole bunch more we have to look at. So the next time we meet, it'll be a draft of all these sections, if we can get it all done. And signage too, that might be too much to get through in one evening, so maybe we won't, but those are the next pieces I want to tackle. So at the next meeting, we'll have a draft of this, hopefully signage, and then you'll have all the district standards as well. That's a big chunk of the code. So we just want to continue to make progress. So going forward, the next thing we're going to be going over is subdivision regulations and general development standards. So the general development standards is what I just talked about, those other pieces. And I want to begin to go over subdivision regulations. Those aren't overly complicated. Usually your public works department have a really good handle on that. It's street width, cul-de-sac and radius, those things. It's like if someone's going to develop property, these are the design standards for subdivision regulations. So that's pretty straightforward. I don't anticipate a lot of crazy changes to that, but I'd like to bring that forward as well because it's a clean, easy thing to sort of say, we reviewed it, we agree, we're moving on. So the next time I want to finish wrapping up general development standards, which is the ones I just went over, and subdivision regs. If we can get the signage, we will, but I want to do those two things next. Then after that, we will have the administrative standards and signage. So we're beginning to sort of chunk these things out to get done. So with that, I know it's a lot to go over, it's a lot of detail.
No, it's really good, John.
No, it
I
is
want to say
good.
thank you.
Yeah.
This is a long overdue situation, as you probably now know well. The thing that I was asking Brian about yesterday, and for the benefit of the rest of the group, remember we had kind of a joint meeting one time
Right.
with the village trustees, and as it relates to timing, I know there's issues going on at your shop too,
Right.
but guess of when this becomes, matter of public record and
Sure.
using the new code.
I've got a thing between now and the end of the year. My goal is to have the districts buttoned down that we went over tonight, get those 100% shored up in the next couple of weeks, to get the subdivision regulations, all the development standards done, and hopefully signage. That's most of your code. And I'm confident we can get that done in the next couple of months. And that's a lot. And then after that, it's administrative stuff and definitions. So that's, so I would imagine Q1 next year, this thing is done. If not a little bit before that, or early Q1. So I plan on getting this done pretty quickly, so.
So I don't want to overstep, John, but I'm wondering, Brian, do we start to put some framework around when it's done and implemented, or is that just not the purview of this group? Because I don't want to find ourselves, John, this is not about you.
Right.
This is about our community. That we're a year from now and we're still not with a new deal. So,
Yeah, from a process standpoint, obviously the workshops are, this is a way for us to discuss the code and what the provisions are, the changes are. So, we'll have this hard documentation to give to you as well, so you can still review that and comment on that as well. And going through the process is more to, from a discussion standpoint, get it resolved at our point. So if first quarter of next year, we at least have it ready to go. And then it's going through the public hearing process to adopt in the village board as well. So there might still be changes or things that get modified at that level that might tweak what's presented or coming out of here. So it might be a multiple meeting type process. But as John and I discussed, we're looking to bring this back in December again to have another workshop to continue this discussion, and then you might have another one in January, potentially February, to keep the momentum going to
Right.
Crank it out, and then once this board is comfortable with the status of it or what that product is at, then we'd actually go through and have a formal public hearing to adopt the code or make recommendations from this board that would be recommended to the village board.
yeah.
And then throughout that process too, I'll be giving updates to the village board as far as where we're at, what type of discussions we've had, so they're apprised of what's going on from a discussion standpoint.
The other thing, you're exactly right. And the other thing we might want to do is once we have sort of a compiled working draft, you've had it, and we've had all our conversations and it's done, we could actually even post it on the village's website for like, say, 3 to 4 weeks, like a month. There's probably, and just say, listen, it's an open review period. Anybody can look at it. And maybe even a week or two before the public hearing, we have a Q&A open house. And Brian and I attend it. And any developer, any builder, any business owner can come in and just ask us questions. And they might say like, hey, that's a real good point. And then when we go to the public hearing, then we can say, we had an open house. We had let everybody sort of vet their issues, general support for everything. But a couple of good points come up. And, they made a good point. We think we might want to make this little tweak. And we're presenting it this evening at the public hearing in response to what we heard at open house
that's
2
a
weeks
good
ago.
idea.
So an open house for zoning prior to the public hearing. And the reason being for this is not that communities don't literally take all the testimony and really consider things that's said, but the perception of a lot of people at the public is, it's going to public hearing, you're going to adopt this. And we want to give people enough time to really digest it and ask questions and have a dialogue. So a couple weeks before the public hearing to have an open house Q&A, even if nobody shows to offer it, I think is important.
I
So
think you're right.
This is important. This isn't a plan. This is people's property. This is their bread and butter. This is it. And we had to real diligence with getting it through the process and making sure we give people the voice to be heard. And we may be something to say, hey, we understand you. We're still going to go this way. That may happen, but I want to make sure we are err on the side of a little more dialogue than less.
Thoughtfulness, John. I
Yeah.
think that's a good approach. And I want to say thank you, on behalf of our
Right.
community for your good work. I know there's been some moving pieces to this.
Yeah, we've had, again, and we had a staff member, Jamie, who was here a couple of months ago, or a few months ago. She is now a planner with Highland Park. So she was working on this with me. I'm working on it now with some other people in my shop. So we're going to try to pick up. There's about a month or so lag in changing up staff and coming up to speed on stuff.
Yeah.
It happens, we don't like it, but it does. We'll miss her on the project, but that's what is being referred to as sort of in our shop. We had a staff change on this assignments.
And I'll just speak for myself, gentlemen, but if there's any value, I don't know how this process works behind the scene, but if time permits and you're talking through some things in a meeting environment, I don't know from a protocol, Brian, what's allowed and what isn't, but if there's some subject matter experts on this group that are very knowledgeable about specific areas of the code that may benefit from additional feedback.
Yeah, and if there's areas of the code that the board members have insight in or that you've delved into before, if there's areas that you want to discuss with me further, I'm more than happy to do that and
Yeah.
potentially set up a conference call or whatnot if we need to.
And I think, Mr. Chair, if we get to that situation, I know what you're saying, if he's looking for advice from somebody who has a specific, you're not calling a whole board meeting, it's Brian, let's say me, sitting down over something, that's different, it's not a full board meeting, then I don't believe we have to.
That's why I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but
been
I
through
think-
this before,
yeah.
but I think I'll just volunteer myself. I mean, I'm the airline guy, but I don't think there's anything about the.
So when we want to put in the
To the
airport,
Yeah.
That's the height restrictions.
Yeah, in terms of like Robert's Rules of Orders or anything, if any one of you wanted to sit down with Brian to go over anything.
yeah, we don't have,
And then
we
Brian said, oh,
can't.
hey, one of the commissioners raised X, Y, and Z, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, because it's not four of us meeting together.
Right.
Yeah,
It's not a.
You're not
Yeah.
taking action, it's not a quorum, it's not even multiple, it's just one person.
Right.
That's easy.
If there's an area of the code that you've loved for 20 years, or whatever regulation is,
Hey,
feel free to call me and talk about what the issues are. And
Yeah, and I'll just mirror some of your comments. Thank you, because
Bet.
killing down some of these graphs and charts and tables we have, I can think of my, 10 years on the board now, 12? Jeez. But going through that thing, going, okay, which is, cleaning that up is great.
Just in the sections we've gone to, we've already encountered over 32 pages of tables.
Yeah. No, it's nice to get those down a little bit.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and then my question, Brian, is, because you brought up stormwater, one of the near and dearest to my heart. I know we have some things such as pervious coverage, things of that nature, but are we looking at going with a full stormwater code, or are we just going to make reference to the county
it would reference that we've adopted the county's ordinance.
that we've adjusted?
So it's consolidating all of our regulations, so that ordinance that we've adopted would be a part of this.
It would all say reference to the county stormwater ordinance, okay.
And that would be in the UDO by reference.
Yeah,
Right.
basically, the whole goal of this is that you have one section of our village code that a developer can go to and find out all the regulations they need to know for developing their property.
Gotcha.
So if we've already adopted the county's ordinance and we administer their ordinance, for their stormwater regulations, that would just be adopted into.
Just
the
adopted
section.
into it as part, okay.
The other thing you could do, and I'm not recommending this sort of thinking out loud, but if there is a desire to talk about an issue, the zoning ordinance, on a meeting where I'm not coming up here to present it anyway, it could be a standing thing, open discussion of members on zoning ordinance update. Then you can get that agenda item. You can say, does anybody have any questions or anything they want to talk about, or
That's a
just
good
wait for next
suggestion.
month, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you've got a publicized agenda that says, you know, whether I'm there or not. And if I'm there, then it's an official presentation and a discussion. But if I'm not there, you might say, oh, I've got something to talk, you know, I know where I think, but I'm just sort of get the pulse of the rest. I'm just like get curious. Then you could talk about it.
'Cause
and
it's already on the
give me feedback,
schedule.
because it's on the agenda.
good idea.
So it's a way to keep it active through to adoption or public hearing, whether I'm here or not. You have an opportunity on an agenda to say, hey, and if there's no discussion, you say, okay, next, no discussion. But at least it gives you the legal framework to just talk as a group, whether I'm here or not, with Brian's sort of insight.
Yeah.
So that might not be a bad idea.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Add that to our schedule.
Yeah, at least, you know, I mean, you probably know now that, you know, we're not meeting on a regular basis.
Right.
Sometimes the meetings just get canceled because
Right.
there's no petitions.
Right.
But maybe if we can just agree that between now and the end of the year, Brian, that at least one of those agendas includes that comment, I think
Right.
that's helpful.
Yeah, from a discussing scheduling standpoint, we've got the case that was supposed to be this evening is continued to our next meeting on the 9th.
Yes.
So we'll have that meeting. The following meeting is Thanksgiving, so I'm assuming nobody wants to meet that day.
I'll be
And then, the next meeting is the first meeting in December, which is December 14th, and we're planning to have the next workshop on this already at that
On the 14th.
time period. So
Okay.
tentatively, that's what we've discussed, and if that holds true, we'll have that discussion on that.
Tentatively, the 14th is the date?
Right.
Okay.
And just to confirm with everyone again, you know, I was talking, just to be forthcoming, I was talking with Brian about this yesterday. I did ask the same question about timing in Q1, and I don't know if that's being too aggressive, if that's being realistic, but I would like to try to put some framework around the timing.
I think, again, assuming that Q1 is the first 3 months of 2018, my goal would be to, by then, if not before, to have a working draft of all the pieces.
Good.
So it would be a thing in a binder that you guys could look at, mark up. We could post online. If once you've reviewed it to feel comfortable putting it online, working draft, this is a discussion draft, this is not up for adoption yet, blah, blah, blah. But by the end of Q1, so we're talking end of March. My goal would be to have that working draft of the whole shebang, the whole UDO. I think that's very doable.
Good.
In fact, I would push to make that happen in our shops.
Better. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So gentlemen, I know we're getting to the latter part of our meeting here, but before we potentially adjourn, I just want to make sure that I've given everyone a bite at the apple to ask John any other questions about what we've been discussing tonight, or anything else for that matter.
I just have one. Are we going to allow detached garages?
Yes, we are.
That's known as the Graciano clause.
How many graphs are on that?
That is a recommended change, yes.
Thank you.
Anything else, gentlemen?
I'm good.
So John, I'll close with saying thank you very much for your good work.
You bet.
We appreciate it. And again, to Ms. Rhodes, welcome to the ZPA. And unless there's anything else, gentlemen, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
You
moved.
got it.
Thank you very much. Meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.